What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another week of Final Fantasy versus WoW comparison. This week, of course, we are talking about the healers, which is actually something I'm really excited about because the majority of my time spent raiding and Harden the Paint whenever I played World of Warcraft at a high level was on a Restoration Shaman. Now, I've also dabbled with the Disc Priest and Resto Druid over the course of my 15 years within the game, so I think this is something that I'm pretty well versed in, minus a few of the newer changes since I really haven't played Shadowlands that much. As always, if you guys enjoy my content, want to see more, and get notified when I drop new videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. But before we get into which classes I feel line up with other ones, if you are looking to make that change from WoW to Final Fantasy, we need to talk about the key differences between both of these games. Alright, so let's talk about your first day healing in Final Fantasy. You see those nice little party frames up there in the corner? Well, you better get used to them, and you might want to move them somewhere where they're a little more accessible, because that's how you're going to be healing. There is no grid, voodoo, healbot, any of those things. You use your party frames in Final Fantasy. The other thing you're going to notice is you're kind of going back to the Stone Age. You're going to be clicking bars and using a keybind, and it's a lot different than WoW because a lot of people are just so used to mouse overs. And the problem with mouse overs in Final Fantasy, you can still make them, but they do have sort of a latency delay, so to speak. In WoW, if you've ever hard casted a spell, especially with like aftermarket UIs like Elv or something, you'll notice that the grayed out portion at the end of your cast bar will sort of be your Q window. And what this means is if you hit that button again or any other button within that grace window of that cast time, it auto queues up the next spell. So you can take your hands off your keyboard, it'll do that for you. But in Final Fantasy, it doesn't have that grace window. So spamming a button repeatedly isn't going to queue up more spells for you. You essentially still have to go through the global cooldown delay. So doing a mouse over essentially just means that it has to go through this extra delay before that ability will go off. So 9 times out of 10, it's gonna be faster if you just click on a party frame and hit the keybind than it is for you to try to mouse over everything and wait for a delay in between all of those spells that you're trying to queue up, because there is no queue. Now, the other thing that is really cool about Final Fantasy, especially as we move towards Endwalker, is they're actually planning on sort of separating out their healers a little bit more. They're actually going to divide it up between throughput healing and shield healing. Now, my speculation is that there's going to be a requirement of having one in each when it comes to higher level raids. So the White Mage and Astrologian are going to be sort of your throughput healers, while the Scholar and the new class, the Sage, will end up becoming your shield healers. So overall, I think that that's a really interesting gameplay design, to where WoW kind of has that with like using a Disc Priest when they're really overpowered to sort of clutch a lot of content, but it's not like it's something that's baked in where they're requiring mechanics to be based off of possibly having a shield healer, which is something that I think we're going to see in Endwalker. So overall, that is something to look forward to, and if you're considering whether you want to be more of a reactive healer or a proactive healer, I think that's something else to consider as well. The first healer we're going to talk about is probably one of the more simple and most common healers in the game, and that of course is the White Mage, and for good reason. The White Mage is probably every healer's wet dream when it comes to what they really want in a healing class. I mean, its mana regen is really good. It can do really high burst windows by using its blood lilies for damaging spells. It has really good cooldowns, a ton of them on really short durations, so you know, you could take a tank from 0 to 100% HP and a minute later do the exact same thing. It has really good single target, really insane AoE healing with hot effects added on top of that, and it even has AoE stun, so dungeon running is really, really simple because you can just keep mobs locked up for a really good majority of your trash pull. So, I mean, the White Mage literally just has nothing to complain about when it comes to a healing class. Now, the WoW healers I'm going to compare it to, there's definitely some things to complain about, but if I had to compare them to anything, I'm probably going to give points to the Holy Priest just because of cooldowns like Apotheosis, Guardian Spirit, Divine Hymn. So from that aspect, it has some good cooldowns. It also has some hots through Renew or Prayer of Mending, I suppose. And it even has a single target stun through Chastise. So while it isn't quite up to the par as what a white mage is, if you essentially took that holy priest and gave him a ton of crack, he would probably be somewhat on par with what a white mage is. Now, the other healer class that I'm going to give points to for this is probably going to be the Restoration Druid. Now, the only reasoning for this is because you can talent extra cooldowns with like tree form and stuff, I still believe, even though I haven't played Shadowlands a whole bunch on Resto Druid. It also has really good mana regen through Innervate and really short cooldown sort of burst heals with Swift Mend. And of course, obviously, a Druid has tons of hots just like the White Mage can. So it's a very sort of reactive healer and can pick people up whenever shit hits the fan. Up next, we have one of the more versatile healers within the game, and that is the Astro. Now, what makes it really unique is the fact that it has two different types of stances. The first, of course, is a Dineural, which adds hot effects to your abilities, and the second one is Nocturnal, which adds absorbs. So being able to choose between these two options is actually a pretty strong ability. Now, the important thing to note when picking one of these is if you start a boss encounter, you're locked into that one. So there's no stance dancing, so to speak, within the game. And Square Enix has already led us to believe that in the Endwalker expansion, they are going to make this class a bit more of a throughput healer and possibly either change or remove how a lot of its absorb effects works. So the other thing that makes it pretty unique though are its buff systems that it has. It sort of draws from a deck of cards and will give you a damage buff that you have to choose to add to either a melee or a ranged character, which tanks and healers are included in those categories respectively. But the really cool thing is if you sort of draw the right cards and play them correctly and get unique buffs, then you can actually add a raid-wide buff on top of that, which overall makes them really great in support roles. And the last thing that I actually liked a lot about this class that really hit home for me personally was an ability called Earthly Star. Now, it's essentially a little light ball that you will put on the ground with an 8-yard radius, so you have to be fairly close to get it to full effect. But before or after a 10-second window, you can choose to explode it. Obviously, exploding it sooner will lead to less healing, while waiting that 10-second window or greater will allow for the maximum effect. So overall, it does allow you to sort of have some proactive thinking within the game and being able to place things ahead of time, knowing that a mechanic will be coming within 10 seconds later. And overall, that definitely reminded me of a specific WoW class, that being my favorite, the Astro Shaman. I mean, if anything, that Earthly Star ability is just kind of like that Cloudburst totem, just a little bit. So having that type of gameplay, along with a bit of hot effects through, I guess, Riptides, or maybe you can consider Healing Stream, even though it's not really a hot per se in the classic sense. But the other thing is the card system, while not providing buffs from a WoW player's perspective, they still provide a really supportive role through things like Tremor Totem, Windrush Totems, Earth Shields, and so that kind of felt a little bit like that gameplay to me. Now, if I had to pick another WoW class to possibly give you a little bit of the same feeling, I guess we would probably have to go for the Holy Paladin. While also not having a traditional hot effect that you would put on targets, you still get a bit of that type of small, slow effect healing through things like Glimmer of Light, while also still being really supportive through all of the hand options you can give, like Protection, Freedom, Sacrifice, as well as the auras that you give to your whole raid. So overall, I think that they're pretty close in regards to that Astro gameplay, and even more so possibly if we look at some of the revamp changes or things that are going to happen to the class specifically going into Endwalker. And finally, we have reached the Scholar. And if you're not sure whether or not you want to try healing in Final Fantasy or just play a DPS, then the Scholar might be the right option for you, because it is the only class in the game where you can level up both a Scholar and Summoner simultaneously. Now, the only problem with this is whichever one you choose to level, the other one you will still need to do its class quest for, as just doing them on the one that you level doesn't automatically do all the class quests on the other one. So you still got to unlock those abilities that way. But The way that the Scholar plays is a little different compared to both of the other choices that you have. And that's because it is sort of a part pet healer, but also part absorb healer. Now, the pet at lower levels is really good. It can pretty much solo heal the dungeons for you, and it's pretty brain dead. So that way it gives you time to sort of learn mechanics and just figure out your class slowly. But at higher levels, the pet doesn't really do a whole ton of healing unless you use the cooldown that sort of transforms it and evolves it to make it a really powerful sort of healer. But the absorbs on it are actually really insane. I mean, whenever you're in a raid group and you're like, oh man, this AoE is about to hurt, then you just see like a 50% absorb shield on your entire raid team. It's a good feeling. It is a really, really comforting, nice, soft, cushiony feeling. I love it. I love it a lot. But if you have to compare it, I guess, to a WoW class, I'm gonna have to say a Disc Priest. I mean, a Disc Priest has really insane AoE absorbs through like Rapture, just blanket bubbling everyone, and I mean, Barrier does provide a damage reduction. It doesn't really give an absorb, but it gives you that sort of safe feeling from a class. And I guess you could possibly almost consider saying if you play a Mistweaver, you might enjoy this class as well, just because while you have not really a true pet with the form of Yulon or Chi-Ji, it works in that similar manner, or the way that you can sort of beam a constant heal onto like your tank. The pet actually has a channeled heal that works that way too. It's not really super strong, but it's sort of similar in comparison. So overall, I think that if you're gonna try the Scholar and you're not really sure if healing is right for you or you don't like healing, at least you have that option of being able to fall back on the Summoner class. Well, that's it for this video, guys. If you enjoy these types of comparisons from WoW classes to Final Fantasy classes, be sure to check out our previous video involving all of the tanks, or hit that subscribe button to get notified on the upcoming weeks when we release all of those damage classes that are available. Until next time, guys, take care. See ya.